APTN National News Weekend. It's been 5 years since the national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls released its final report. And MMIWG advocates are expressing their frustration on the government's minimal progress on the document's 231 calls for justice. APTN's Fraser Needham has that story.
Assembly of First Nations National Chief Cindy Woodhouse-Nepenak says this is not a happy day.
In Canada, the government's response to the national inquiry into missing and murdered women and girls represents a historic low point. It echoes a persistent pattern of failure.
The AFN has released a new report card that says only 2 of the 231 calls for justice have been completed. Many others have only seen limited progress, and some have not yet been started. Hilda Anderson-Piers of the National Family and Survivors Circle says this is unacceptable.
That there is a lack of political will to fully implement the 231 calls for justice, and it's a real, call out for international oversight, to ensure that there's accountability and the 231 calls for justice are implemented.
Not surprisingly, the NDP was taking the Liberals to task for this slow rate of progress during question period on Monday afternoon.
And the Liberals continue to ignore this ongoing genocide. Commissioners who led this inquiry are giving this government a failing grade. Rates of violence are up. Families are left looking for answers. 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and things are getting worse. Will the Liberals stop stalling and implement the calls for justice to save lives now?
Taking questions from reporters afterwards, Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations Gary Anasandagri insisted progress on the calls for justice is being made and took issue with the AFN's numbers.
I think there's a lot more than 2 that have been done. I mean, I will have to take issue with that particular number. I have a great deal of respect for the national chief. The work around the 231 calls for justice requires both the federal government, the provinces and territories, as well as civil society who have been working on this for many years. So of the 215 that directly deal with either sole jurisdiction of the federal government or shared jurisdiction, we have advanced roughly 160 of those calls to action.
Both Woodhouse-Nepenak and Anderson-Piers say one call for justice that is long overdue is 1.7, which calls for the appointment of an ombudsperson to oversee government progress on the calls for justice. In January 2023, the Liberals appointed Jennifer Moore-Rattray to provide recommendations on who should fill this role. But on Monday, 1.5 years later, Anasandagri was still unable to say when the ombudsperson position would be actually filled.
Thank you.
Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
We continue to follow the trial of a non-Indigenous man who admitted to killing 4 Indigenous women: Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and an unidentified victim known as Buffalo Woman. The trial is unique because Jeremy Skibicki is claiming to be not criminally responsible due to mental illness. On the stand this week was a psychiatrist ordered by the court to assess him. Here's T.R. Wheatley with that report and a warning: there are some disturbing details.
A second forensic psychiatrist took to the stand this week for the trial of Jeremy Skibicki. This doctor told the court that the self-confessed killer does not have schizophrenia, nor has he ever been diagnosed in his lifetime with a major mental illness. Dr. Gary Shamowitz of Hamilton, Ontario said Skibitsky had fabrications of a mental disorder and was very nuanced, even calling him intelligent. He told court those kind of actions, quote, speaks loudly to his state of mind, unquote. Shamowitz's diagnosis contradicts that of defense psychiatrist Dr. Sahom Dawes. Dawes said Skibitsky is schizophrenic and has been since 2019. Shamowitz testified he interviewed Skibitsky over 8 hours and went over thousands of pages of health records, mostly from emergency room visits gathered by Skibitsky's defense team dating back to the year 2000. He also watched this 7-hour police interrogation and read the transcripts where Skibitsky confessed to killing Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Buffalo Woman. Shamowitz testified that Skibitsky only started talking about God and godlike voices in the lead-up to his trial. It was Shamowitz's view that the not criminally responsible or NCR defense only came up because there were higher stakes with having to face 4 first-degree murder charges. He also told court it was his duty as a forensic psychiatrist to see if there were any other mental illnesses that may not have been on the radar. He diagnosed Skibitsky with anti-personality disorder, substance abuse disorder, and homicidal necrophilia, which means a strong interest in having sex with dead bodies. He further told court it was his opinion that Skibitsky's sexual preference led him to commit murder, and that Skibitsky would have kept killing, the doctor said, had police not caught him. The trial is expected to continue into next week with closing arguments, where the Crown will try prove this isn't a case of NCR and that the killings were intentional and racially motivated. TR Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, TR. For more on this trial, you can head to our website, aptnnews.ca. And if you're triggered by this report, supports are available 24/7 through the MMIWG 2S support line. That number is 1-844-413-6649. A First Nations girl in rural Manitoba is speaking out against racism she says she experienced while wearing her ribbon skirt to high school. She says the school hasn't done enough to combat the harassment she went through. Sav Jonesa has more.
Red Dress Day happens across Canada every May to raise awareness about violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people. 17-year-old Serenity Neepin says she and others were encouraged to show their support at her high school in Roblin, Manitoba, one of 16 schools in the Mountain View School Division. She thought it was a good idea.
You know what, it would be perfect to wear my ribbon skirt. It's a nice day out. I'm going to support this.
Neepin picked up a friend on the way to school, but when she arrived,
I got out of my truck and I made eye contact with this one boy, and he yells towards me, Indian, and does a mocking Indian call at me. And that hurt very much.
She says this fellow student and his friend laughed at her, but despite this, she held her head high and walked into school. In class, Neepin says he called her an Indian again, but quietly so the teacher couldn't hear.
That's when I was like, no, I had enough. I can't. So I went to talk to my friend and I said, I am uncomfortable. I feel humiliated and I want to go home and change. And that's when she decided, no, we're not letting this slide. We're going to the principal. And that's what we did.
Neepin says the principal seemed caring and told her he would make things right. He brought the boy and his friend to his office and asked if they called her an Indian. They said no. After days of back and forth between the principal, Neepin, and her mom, the principal concludes it's a he said, she said issue and nothing more can be done. But for Neepin, the story isn't over. Grand Chief of the Southern Chiefs Organization, Jerry Daniels, says he stands with Neepin.
They go to school to get education. They don't go to school to be traumatized and treated differently from everyone else.
He has a few ideas on how the situation could be handled.
The messaging coming from the leadership over there can't be, well, it's he said, she said. It has to be, racism will not be tolerated. We have a zero tolerance policy when it comes to racism, and here's the reason, here are the things we're going to do to change it.
Grand Chief Daniels says students like Serenity Neepin need backup.
We would like to see, a First Nations liaison who's in the school. I think that there needs to be a closer partnership with the First Nations in that region to have our own board members as trustees. That's separate from the regular system.
APTN News reached out to the school division. On May 27th, their now former superintendent, Stephen Jaddock, emailed a response. He wrote the division does not comment on individual discipline investigations, but bullying and verbal harassment is not tolerated. He added, "We continue to work with our students in MVSD on reconciliation matters, and school staff will engage students in conversations regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion." In the last few days, 4 weeks after the alleged name-calling, the school division announced Jaddock had departed his position. Soon after, 3 elected school trustees quit. Another current elected trustee, Paul Coffey, said in a public board meeting in April that he refuses to refer to Indigenous people as anything other than Indians, and this about residential schools.
They were good. These are the good things. They're essential for reading and writing and arithmetic. Also enforcement of schools, school attendance,
For now, Nepen says she just wants to move on.
I have not gotten an apology from the boys. I have not gotten an apology from the school. As a matter of fact, that principal won't even look at me now.
She says she's kind of scared to go back next year, the year she graduates.
In my mind, it's like, well, what if this happens next year again? And is it going to be worse, or is it going to be better because now hopefully we're going to take steps forward? It makes me nervous.
Meanwhile, Manitoba's Education Minister, Nello Altamar, says he's ordered what he calls a governance review into the Mountain View School Division. Sav Jonza, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Coming up after the break, why the University of Manitoba is apologizing to Indigenous peoples. Stick around. Welcome back. The University of Manitoba says it has hundreds of Indigenous ancestral remains, belongings, and artifacts in its possession. Now they want to return them to their rightful First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. Sav Jonza was at the announcement on Monday.
The University of Manitoba is publicly apologizing for their collection of Indigenous ancestral remains, a collection they are now calling inappropriate.
The University of Manitoba did not live up to its ideals in their true form. Today, we begin by atoning for these historic failures. We apologize for these past wrongs. We are sorry.
University President Michael Benarosh says the process of rematriating and repatriating, or the returning of the human remains and burial artifacts, will start immediately. The U of M began collecting the remains of Indigenous ancestors at the turn of the 20th century.
We use these ancestral remains and belongings in classrooms and in laboratories, and sometimes put them on display, all without consent from First Nation, Inuit, and Métis families, communities, and nations.
They say they acquired the remains and artifacts in different ways, including some brought to them by the RCMP. These acquisitions ended in the early 1980s.
Today, when I witnessed so many emotions in the ceremony this morning, I get it. To learn about ancestors being in drawers, in paper bags, in stapled little baggies, it's horrific. It's devastating.
Lucy Bell is co-chair and co-founder of the Haida Repatriation Committee. She has been bringing ancestors' remains home to Haida Gwaii north of Vancouver Island for 30 years. As of 2021, she helped bring home more than 500 sets of remains. Now she's adding a few more.
Tomorrow, we take home 4 of our ancestors from this institution, and it's not easy work. It never gets easier to be handling the bones of our ancestors.
Bell hopes that other institutions holding ancestral remains, like Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, will follow the U of M's footsteps. Sav Jonza, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
High school students from the Peel District School Board in Brampton, Ontario, are putting the skills they've learned to good use to help address the housing shortage in First Nations communities. Here's Annette Francis with that story.
You don't want to see any of the floor showing at all, because then it's a pain to get the paint off.
17-year-old Hannah Arberton and her colleagues are putting the finishing touches on the tiny home they've built. It's part of the Specialist High Skills Major, or SHSM program. Arberton has been in the program for a year. She says this project has been a great learning experience.
Because I've had so much confidence within myself to build the frames, to get help with my classmates, and getting confidence from my teacher that also helped me. He believed in me. They believed in me. They let me do stuff at this house, and I'm just so grateful for them.
This is one of 5 homes being built for the Chippewas and Nawash First Nation. It's the result of a partnership between the Habitat for Humanity Halton, Mississauga and the Peel District School Board. According to Statistics Canada, the housing shortfall in First Nations communities means 1 in 5 First Nations people live in overcrowded homes. Peter Oliveira says over the past 3 years, his organization has collaborated with 3 different First Nation communities, and all have used their units differently.
So we've seen them use them for health services, mental health and addiction services, transitional housing, and short-term housing uses. And the units that we're designing and building are very flexible to the community's needs. So we're trying to develop units that are easy to build so that students can understand them, but then easy to use for the end users.
According to teacher Will Patterson, the hands-on course is a popular choice with students from his school, Brampton Centennial, and Judith Nyman Secondary.
A lot of them have an interest in the skilled trades, but they don't know exactly where to take that. And so this gives them an opportunity to experience the skilled trades at different levels. When you build a house, you're involved in many different trades. And so it gives them that exposure. It gives them a real sense of pride, particularly when the home gets shipped off to its community.
For Alberton, whose mom is from Moose Deer Point First Nation, it's surely something to be proud about.
This to happen, it's honestly amazing.
This home will be delivered to the Chippewas and Nawash sometime over the summer months. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Brampton, Ontario.
Time for one last break, and then we'll profile a Whitehorse designer who's heading to the most prestigious Indigenous art market on Turtle Island. Stick around. Welcome back. South of the Medicine Line now, where the Ho-Chunk Nation, along with maritime archaeologists in Wisconsin, made a huge discovery. Hidden underneath sediment, they found nearly a dozen dugout canoes at the bottom of Lake Mendota in Madison, Wisconsin. According to the Wisconsin Historical Society, the oldest canoe was built 4,500 years ago, making it the oldest discovery ever recorded in the Great Lakes region. The canoes were found in a section of lake bed in the ancestral territory of the Ho-Chunk Nation. The first canoe was found 3 years ago, and all the canoes will now be safely preserved in a facility in Madison for further conservation and study. 2 of them will be on display at the Wisconsin Historical Society's History Center, set to open in 2027.
This is an important historic moment for maritime archaeology, for the state of Wisconsin, for the Ho-Chunk Nation, but also the Great Lakes region and tribal nations across the Great Lakes region too, because this is the oldest dugout canoe dating back to 1000 BC that's ever been found and recovered in the Great Lakes region.
The ability to take today's process now through science and their expertise over here and utilize it to teach our youth, about our steep history and a connection to an area here that reaches all the way back to the last glacier period. They say 3,000 years, right, that dugout canoe.
It's the most prestigious Indigenous art market in the world. The 102nd Santa Fe Indian Market in New Mexico will host hundreds of Indigenous artists from across Turtle Island, not to mention draw in an estimated 100,000 people. While northern representation at the market has been lacking in previous years, that's about to change. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
These are all antique beads here that I've sourced.
It's clear to see why artist and fashion designer Randy Nelson's craftsmanship is top-notch. Nelson, who is Taaktauz and based in Whitehorse, is passionate about incorporating natural materials into her work. That's why she, along with a cohort of 10 other artists from the Yukon and the Northwest Territories, were recently selected to attend the Santa Fe Indian Market in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The market draws in around 100,000 customers and 800 artists from across North America.
I understand Santa Fe to be a really big milestone in people's career. It's really prestigious, and it's definitely the top artists who are accepted to go.
The Yukon First Nations Culture and Tourism Association and Northwest Territories Arts Program partnered with the Southwestern Association for Indian Arts to bring this cohort to Santa Fe. The organization says there's been minimal participation from Yukon and NWT artists, something they want to change. In addition to the market, the cohort will also get the opportunity to meet with retail galleries and participate in fashion shows and an awards ceremony.
It's the first cohort ever in 102 years of the market, so it's pretty exciting that they did this collaboration. So these are some of the materials I use. This is caribou hair, so this is the whitest part that comes from the neck.
Nelson hopes her use of quills, antler, and ermine fur will help get her international exposure.
I think just to be able to bring something different, something that's unique to me and my nation and my upbringing, and be able to bring it onto a different stage.
And Yellowknife Dene carver John Sabarin is working on one of the handful of pieces he'll be taking to the market. His chlorite stone sculptures are a reflection of his Dene roots, stories, and legends.
Looking forward to meeting new art galleries and making connections with people for maybe possibility of other works.
Sabarin says there's a lot of talented artists, but the market up here is smaller than the south.
So there's only so much art that you can sell in the north before you have to send them out. 90% of my carvings I ship out from Yellowknife.
He's glad the market will provide a unique opportunity for northern artists to have their work noticed beyond the territories.
I'm really excited to be part of this team, this cohort team from the Yukon and Northwest Territories artists. So it's going to be a lot of fun.
The Santa Fe Indian Market will run from August 16th to 18th. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Love to make it down there one year. Now to our ongoing series for Indigenous History Month, where we're showcasing voices of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis poets from across the country. From Clearwater River and La Loche, Saskatchewan, Agar Hango is our next poet for our Indigenous History Month's anthology series. Here's Agar reading his submission.
I was born in the sky of a dying language. From the shiver of cold basements, broken love from a family's embrace. I'm from the savory taste of steaks off paper plates. Those deafening silence of placements from incarcerations. Results from a culture of gypsies living under sanctions. See, I left, but still hear the roaring quads in the distance. Pumping hot monster truck pistons. Deep-rooted cries of assimilated Christians. Whispers from a system trying to convince me. False depictions on my people wrongfully convicted. I'm from the drunken sizzle of bacon and eggs at 4 in the morning. I befriended lost change in the cushions from couch surfing. I'm from where the cops are the biggest gangsters. Beat you in the cells with hatred on their racist faces, assuming every native is affiliated and dangerous. See, I'm from TVs telling me criminals are everything they're perceiving. But I could tell you about a couple killers who had the decency to feed me. Where I'm from.
Thanks for that. You can find those all over on our website, aptnnews.ca. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this weekend. You can find much more on the website, aptnnews.ca, and be sure to join us at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday for your first look at news. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch. Have a good weekend.